In this video, we're going to go over the 5 laws of German New Medicine by Dr. Halmer. And I'm going to be referencing a lot of his books that are only in German. I had to buy these books, take pictures of every single page, and then run them through Google Translator because I don't understand German. I think there's like a lot of finer details in these books that you don't see in a lot of the more popular German New Medicine English texts. A lot of it, though, is from the scientific chart of German New Medicine. This is kind of the Bible of German New Medicine, if you could say. And Dr. Halmer wasn't really, that's kind of funny to say because Dr. Halmer really wasn't the biggest fan of religions. And I'm also going to be referencing other German New Medicine texts that are in other languages. The Italian and the French languages have a lot of good German New Medicine information that is just not, they're just not popular ideas in English, and they're very, very helpful. So I stumbled upon German New Medicine because I had Crohn's, colitis, and I had gastritis. I had all sorts of digestive issues going on. I was always super, super skinny. This is me after years of doing boring diets and crazy holistic remedies. Like I was doing all sorts of crazy stuff. I could barely get above 160 pounds. Now I weigh 200 pounds, no problem. I eat whatever I want. And I've helped many people heal their digestive issues with German New Medicine at the core. Now, probably my biggest complaint that I hear about German New Medicine is that it's complicated. And, guess what? It's German. Everything German's complicated. I have a BMW, and I still have to watch a YouTube video every time I try to figure out how to open up the hood or open up the gas cap or even find the cup holder. It's just how they are. But I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible for you guys. So what is German New Medicine? Is it a pill that you take? Well, Dr. Halmer originally wanted to call it the New Medicine because these different medicines that you see down here, they're all different philosophies on how disease operates in the body and how the best way to treat it. I'm not an expert in, Chinese medicine, but it has something to do with like beating away the cold and being just cold causes disease. That's why you don't drink ice, drinking ice water in their culture is just crazy. You just don't do that. So a lot of it's centered around that and getting your cheese balanced and stuff like that. Ayurvedic medicine, I have no idea. And it's just it's so big. Homeopathy is about treating like with like. Again, I have no idea what that means. And then modern day medicine is allopathic medicine. Allopathic medicine is to treat with different. And again, what does that mean? Nobody knows. And that's why I think allopathic medicine is, as unsuccessful as it is today. But German New Medicine shows us how the body actually operates, how disease actually operates, so that we can make intelligent decisions on how to stop our diseases, autoimmune diseases. So Dr. Halmer, he was born in 1935 and he died in 2017. Before he discovered German New Medicine, he made some pretty cool inventions. These inventions, he lived off the royalties, and so he was allowed to do a lot of pro bono work and kind of do a lot of interesting research that, many other doctors weren't able to do. He loved animals. Here's a picture of his cat and his dog. And German New Medicine started when his son Durk was shot by the Prince of Italy at the time. And there's actually a Netflix documentary about it. Not a lot about Dr. Halmer in that documentary, but it kind of shows what was going on. And this happened before he started making these discoveries in the end of the 1970s, I believe. So shortly after Durk passed away, this was a very stressful, traumatic event for Dr. Halmer. He developed testicular cancer, and he knew it was somehow related to Durk's passing. And when he started working with other testicular cancer patients, he realized they had all suffered a big traumatic event before their testicular cancer started. And that's kind of how things got started. So the first law of German New Medicine is called the iron rule of cancer. And that's how you'll see it named in most English texts. But if you read his German books, it's more like the first rule of cancer and so-called diseases. Because we don't like to call it disease because it's not really a disease. I guess it is dis-ease on the conflict. But now we refer to disease as an SBS, which is the German abbreviation for a significant biological special program that starts from a DHS, a Durk Halmer syndrome, which is a serious, dramatic, and isolating conflict shock that occurs at the same time on the psyche. So the psyche is like our thoughts, both conscious, unconscious, and subconscious, on the brain and on the organ. Now, usually like someone's like first comeback at this is like, well, what about scurvy? This is just wrong because, vitamin C deficiency, that's a disease. I would think of that more as an injury. You give the person vitamin C and he gets better almost, within a couple of days. Don't confuse these. We're not like ignoring these malnutrition, poisoning, and injury. They're a separate issue. And when I explain German New Medicine very simply, it's every organ has a survival purpose. When you experience a stressful event, your subconscious mind goes, oh, he needs help to survive. Let's put one of our survival tools into overdrive. And it picks an organ to put into overdrive. And then if it's in overdrive for too long, or the conflict is too intense, we start to get symptoms. Now, somebody I worked with, they suffered a broken arm, which destroyed their football career. And when they woke up from surgery, the doctor was like, hey, your arm's completely trashed. Your football career is over. And this dude was like going to play like NFL football and all that fun stuff. And that started his colon into overdrive when he woke up and the doctor said, career's over. And the conflict got resolved when he found a new career. And that's when he started seeing bloody diarrhea in the toilet. So, the football injury injured his arm, but the bad news, the conflict shock was when he got the news that, his career is over. So, things like that can happen. So point number 2 of the first law is at the moment of the DHS, the conflict shock, the biological and survival conflict determine the location of the special program in the brain called a Halmer focus. You can see it on a brain CT scan. It's called a Halmer focus, and the location on the corresponding organ. Now, this is what really opened me up to German New Medicine. Dr. Halmer mapped out every single disease in the brain. If somebody had Crohn's, there would be something going on these relays right here every single time. If somebody had colitis, something would be going on these relays every single time. If somebody had something going on in the liver, there would be something here. He mapped out every single, if somebody had like back pain or hip pain, there would be something going on here on a brain CT scan. When the conflict is active, it looks like a shooting target. If you go to like the firing range and boom, 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 the hole that the bullet puts in the paper, that's what he called them, like shooting targets at first. When the conflict gets resolved, the organ needs to recover from being in overdrive but also the brain's processing more information, so that brain relay needs to heal as well. And you can see on this CT here, it's like there's edema, there's water on the brain relay trying to, repair the overdrive that it was in. The third point of the first law is the special program runs at the same time on all 3 levels in all phases in the psyche, the brain, and the organ. This is better explained in the second law. So there's a conflict shock. There's something happening on the brain, the organ, and then in your psyche. When the conflict gets resolved, same thing. Something is happening in the psyche, the brain, and the organ. And the psyche is leading, by the way. During the epicrisis, there's stuff happening in the psyche, the brain, and the organ. It's all connected. The brain controls your whole body. So the second law of German New Medicine is the law of two phases. Every special program has two phases. The conflict active phase and the post-conflict resolution phase, which you will sometimes be referred to as the healing phase. And I do not like calling it the healing phase because it's a little misleading, because most of the people I work with are stuck in the healing phase. And they think they can just sit back and relax and like, oh, I'm just healing. I could just sit back and do nothing. I like to call it the post-conflict resolution phase, or the PCL phase. So the person is like more focused on, doing the things that they need to do to get better. And a lot of these special programs, they just stay in the conflict active phase their whole life. And sometimes that's an issue, and other times it's not an issue. So here's some more terms that we need to become aware of when it comes to special programs. There's the conflict shock, which we've already talked about. The conflict active phase. Now we're in the conflict active phase until we resolve the conflict. So that one guy, this crappy news of, I lost my career of a football player. He did not resolve that conflict until he got his first paycheck at like a new job. That was the resolution that put him into post-conflict resolution phase A. And this is sometimes called the inflammation phase or the edema phase. It's better to kind of see it in this. So this guy he didn't want to hear this crappy news. So what the colon does is it holds crap. It doesn't really digest food. It holds crap. So it developed extra gut cells to help, which these extra cells, they secrete mucus to help break down and help the crap slide through better. And this guy also had a lot of diarrhea, which also hints at crap I want to get rid of, but I can't. He did not have, so when the cells are growing, and every organ kind of has its own dance that it does as it goes through this. But most conditions don't really have noticeable symptoms in the conflict active phase. So when the conflict got resolved, when he got a new job and he got his first paycheck, now all of a sudden the body's like, we don't need these high maintenance cells anymore. Let's get rid of them. We don't need them anymore. Let's get rid of them. And so water enters those cells. It also enters your brain as well. So, a lot of the times you'll have headaches and night sweats. The psyche will go from being stressed out about it to going relaxed. Usually with the people I worked with, that gets interrupted at the sight of bloody diarrhea in the toilet. Now the bloody diarrhea in the toilet is crap they want to get rid of, but they can't. So part of the therapy of German New Medicine is understanding how your body works, so every negative symptom doesn't get catastrophized and turn on another special program and give you more symptoms and just create this horrible snowball effect. But when the body is done removing all these cells, it goes into the epicrisis. And this is where there's like the tissue spasms and it squeezes out all of the edema, all of the water in the tissue. And this is when you will have fevers. This is usually people go to the hospital here or here. It's squeezing out all the water. And the amount of, how intense all this is and how long all this is all depends on how long and intense the conflict active phase was. Once the healing crisis ends, and that usually it's like a day or two. It depends on which tissue we're talking about. There's a lot of details. That's kind of why I'm choking on my own words right here. Then there's the scarring phase where the symptoms get less and less and less, and things are going back to normal. So getting rid of these cells is very painful. We squeeze it out, and then hopefully it goes back to, it will go back to normal. But that usually, if you're watching a German New Medicine video, that's not what happened. The healing phase was interrupted, and we'll talk about that in a few slides. So there's a term called a hanging conflict, and this is where you just remain conflict active. A good example of that is somebody who just has chronic stomach ulcers. They are conflict active all the time. It's when someone cannot resolve the conflict. Then there's something called a hanging healing, which is probably what the vast majority of you are experiencing. And, let's say you're in a bad relationship, romantic relationship, and you finally get rid of the piece of crap. The bloody diarrhea starts, and then, they come back into your life. Then they're back out of your life. They come into your life. They're back out of your life. You come in, or you get into a new relationship, and you subconsciously experience it the same way. And another tricky thing, which the German New Medicine texts really don't give it enough justice of how tricky tracks are, or as I refer to them mostly as subconscious PTSD triggers. These are subconscious reminders of the conflict shock that reactivate the special program and give you symptoms. So let's pretend this conflict shock is this guy's like playing World of Warcraft on his doorstep, and the mom comes home and it's like, I told you to do the dishes. Why are the dishes still not done? Why didn't you mow the lawn? Da, 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 da. And she grabs the computer and smashes it on the ground. What are some potential PTSD triggers? Maybe it's every time he walks through the front door. Maybe it's every time he hears a female scream or yell. Maybe it's every time he smells freshly cut grass. Maybe it's every time something dirty dishes. Maybe he was in the middle of eating a sandwich, while he was getting yelled at. Like guilty by association. We need to be like, this is, the brain saw this as like a life or death situation. And it's better to be safe than sorry. And a lot of the times when you encounter these things, like you won't even experience, like they're not really logical in the sense that we think about it. Like what if she was wearing a red shirt? And now every time you see somebody with like a red shirt, you get diarrhea, even though they're your best friend. And they're about to give you a new computer for free. That could trigger diarrhea. This is, or trigger whatever program, whatever symptoms this got linked to. So a lot of the people that I work with, it's usually conflict relapses, like the conflict gets turned back on, like, the boyfriend, girlfriend is causing trouble again, and it's subconscious PTSD triggers. Now, this is more popular in the French German New Medicine books, is something called the programming conflict. And this is where before the conflict shock, you had a programming conflict shock, which got registered, let's say, to that guy's colon, but it didn't cause symptoms just yet. And it wasn't until the second conflict shock. Maybe he got injured playing high school football and he missed a few games. And that was like the original programming conflict shock. And then, a few years later, he really got injured, and that activated the whole special program. That's not talked about much in English, but I've heard a lot of people saying, like, once they started talking about the program, when they started figuring out the programming conflict, that's when their symptoms stopped, instead of just that conflict shock. There's also talk of trauma from our ancestors. And I used to think this was a bunch of hocus pocus until I started, thinking about it a little bit more. So Dr. Guiney's book, he worked a lot. He's French, or I think he's from Belgium, I think. His book is called What If Diseases Were Memories of Evolution? So all of these special programs are memories of our past ancestors, Neanderthal and all the way down to fish. These special programs are memories of past survival struggles to help us survive. And Josie Cromer is really big into like mapping out your family tree. Like you were brought into, like we are a social, we're a social species. And when you are born into a tribe, there's a role for you to fill. Whether it gets pushed onto you by your parents, but biologically, like within our genetics, you're in this tribe to fulfill a specific biological survival need. And there was one study that I thought that was like really interesting. I can't tell where it was from, but they were like measuring how many male versus female birds were being born with these birds that they were monitoring. And when the environment was really good, like there was like a lot of food, there was a lot of shelter, there was a lot of room, the birth rate of females went up to like 80%, and then 20% males. And then when the environment got crowded and there wasn't enough food, it switched. It was like 80% males and 20% females. And usually it's the male's job to, they usually, like when they're done growing up, they go off somewhere. They go out and they leave the nest. But usually the females would stay around and continue to breed and, fill up the space. Females in nature, they tend to stay in the middle of the territory and have children and raise those children, where the males are responsible for protecting the territory and getting more territory and helping managing especially the outer territories. Yeah, this is a little too high level talk for this video, but this is like the way that we need to start thinking about, like, what is our subconscious mind is trying to help us to survive. So the third law of German New Medicine is called the Antogenetic System of Tumors. What does ontogenetic mean? Even when you look it up on Wikipedia, you're like, huh? So the work of German New Medicine is highly anchored in the text of in the thought of evolutionary biology and embryology. And so when an animal or a human goes from conception and it goes, and it turns into a fetus and it starts developing into a baby, it like goes through almost evolution, like in a fast forward pace. And there's different tissues. And these different tissues behave differently when they experience a conflict shock. And we'll talk about that in the fifth one, what I was just about to say. So tissues from the old brain, which is the endoderm and the old mesoderm, they respond in the conflict active phase with cell proliferation to secrete more digestive juices. Or with acne, I feel attacked. So it creates more skin cells to block the attack. And then in the resolution phase, it gets rid of those extra skin cells. And then you get the pus and that super attractive acne. Or you remove those extra gut cells and you get the bloody diarrhea. And then it goes back to normal. But in the new brain programs, in the new mesoderm, which are the bones and the muscles and a lot of the connective tissues, and then in the ectoderm, it's cell loss. in the conflict active phase. So for the epidermis, for the skin, it's flaky skin. Then in the resolution phase, it becomes inflamed and it starts to itch. And then if the conflict gets resolved, then it goes back to nice clear skin. And then there's also a group in the ectoderm where it's in the conflict active phase. Its function is turned down. The function is impaired, and a good example of that is the islet cells in the pancreas. Those cells, their function is turned down, which causes a whole variety of symptoms, which I'm not going to get into because I can't even explain it very well. I tend to focus on helping people with digestive issues, so I can focus on that. And also we think this way when it comes to microbes, the ontogenetic system of microbes. So on the old brain tissues, we mainly find fungi and mycobacteria like tuberculosis. Then in the mesoderm, we find bacteria. And then in the ectoderm, viruses, if they exist. There's a lot of books out there supporting that, germs don't cause disease. If they really did, there would be a lot more sick people than there are today. Dr. Burrell Crohn, the guy who discovered Crohn's disease, he thought it was caused by tuberculosis. And they actually wanted to call it tuberculosis of the gut for a long time. And tuberculosis is on endoderm. The colon in the intestines is endodermal tissue. So I found that very interesting. And this is a book from like the 1930s, the work that he did. And so he thought it was caused by bad bacteria and fungi. So he ran a series of tests where he took, bad bacteria and fungi from somebody with a diseased gut, and he would put it into different mice and rats and rabbits and stuff like that, and they would not develop colitis. And then he did fecal matter transplants of healthy people into sick people, and they never got better. So he ruled out, he's like, tuberculosis bacteria are there, but they don't, when I remove them, the disease doesn't go away. And when I put them into another animal, they don't get the disease. So I think it's safe to say that infection does not cause colitis and Crohn's. So the fifth law, and he didn't have this law for a long time, he added it at some point, but every disease is part of a special program which is best understood through a survival evolutionary biology and ontogenetic point of view. So what does that mean? So this is all life on, it's rumored that Earth is 4 billion years old, and life has been on Earth for about 2 billion years. So for the first billion years, life on Earth was very simple. There was no death. They were just blobs. And all they were concerned with was getting food and pooping out food. And when they had enough food, they would split in two. And really, death didn't even exist at this point. It was like, if something like chopped you off, you just like split in two, and you're the exact same copy as what it was before. So there was really like no life and death. We can only guess of what life was like back then. But the main issues that these organisms had at this time in life was just getting food and crapping out food. They didn't have to worry. I guess they didn't have to worry about fighting off predators yet. In the mesoderm, so this is 500 million years. So like, there's no life, there's no death, there's nobody attacking and killing each other at this point. 1 billion years. That's all like that programming. It's like AI. This AI is programmed to help us survive. And I will develop an organ if I find that that is aiding our survival. And then at some point, we have the old mesoderm tissues start to form. So that's like the skin, or not the skin, but the corium skin. And that's mainly with protection, to protect us from other things. And then, life is still in the water at this point. And then life starts to move on land. So we start to develop muscles and skeletal tissue. And then the ectoderm starts to form, and we start to live. Here, the sexes, the masculine and the feminine, the male and the female start to develop. They start to develop. And then, it becomes more common here. There's still a ton of species today, mostly microbial, that don't have sexes, male and female. So, this is how, you subconsciously experienced it as, if something's going on in your colon, there was crap you wanted to get rid of, but you couldn't. Maybe you call it crap in everyday life. If you have acne, why do you gotta attack me like that all the time? You just came at me, yelling at me for no reason. Why do you gotta attack me like that? Maybe that's how your this is like a lot of detective work. So that's one of the biggest complaints that I hear about German New Medicine is, there's not enough guidance on, how to make a timeline, how to find your PTSD triggers, and, how to resolve your conflicts and stuff like that. And I 100% agree. I went through all of Dr. Halmer's books, and there's not a lot of information on how to resolve conflicts and how to find PTSD triggers. They're hidden within an 800-page book. There might be a paragraph or two about it. No joke. So I've helped people get better from lots of different digestive diseases, Crohn's, colitis, gastritis, you name it. And I do it with my 13-day protocol. And this process kind of takes you through learning the basics of German New Medicine, which I spend a little bit of time on, but most of the time I spend, showing you how to make a timeline, showing you how to track down PTSD triggers. Once you find that conflict, basic, everyday advice on how to resolve that conflict. A lot of it, and understanding how your subconscious mind is seeing it. And a lot of the times it's just bringing it to consciousness, becoming consciously aware of what your PTSD triggers are. And because a lot of you guys with digestive issues and autoimmune issues, you've already resolved the conflict. It keeps relapsing just because of your perspective and in the PTSD triggers. So, and it takes your brain some time to adopt this new perspective. And so I've really made it as simple as possible, fill in the blanks and try to make this a fun process, and to help you get better as fast as possible. The first day is free on my YouTube channel page.